Maria Santos wiped the sweat from her forehead as she pushed the heavy cleaning cart down the long hallway of the Olympic Training Center. At 42 years old, she had been working as a cleaner for 8 years, arriving every morning at 5 a.m. to prepare the facilities before the athletes started their training. Her hands were rough from years of scrubbing floors and cleaning equipment, but her eyes still held the spark of determination that had carried her through countless challenges. The early morning silence was broken only by the sound of her cartwheels rolling across the polished floor. Maria had always found peace in these quiet hours before the chaos of training began. She knew every corner of this massive facility, from the swimming pools to the gymnastics arena, but there was one area that always caught her attention: the shooting range. As she cleaned the windows of the shooting facility, Maria would often pause to watch the athletes practice. Something about the precise movements, the steady breathing, and the intense focus fascinated her. She had never held a gun in her life, growing up in a small village where such opportunities didn't exist for girls like her. Her family had struggled financially, and she had dropped out of school at 14 to work and help support her younger siblings. During her lunch breaks, Maria would sometimes sit on a bench outside the shooting range, eating her simple sandwich while watching the athletes through the glass doors. She noticed how they positioned their bodies, how they controlled their breathing, and how they remained perfectly still before taking their shots. Without realizing it, she began to mimic their movements during her cleaning routine, pretending her spray bottle was a rifle as she aimed at imaginary targets on the walls. One particular morning, Maria was cleaning the shooting range itself when she discovered that one of the practice rifles had been left out. The athletes wouldn't arrive for another 2 hours, and the coaches were in a meeting. Her curiosity finally got the better of her. She looked around nervously, making sure no one was watching, then slowly approached the rifle. Her heart pounded as she picked it up, surprised by how natural it felt in her hands. Standing in the shooting position she had observed countless times, Maria raised the rifle and aimed at the target downrange. She tried to remember everything she had seen: the breathing techniques, the steady grip, the focus on the front sight. Without any formal training or instruction, she squeezed the trigger. The shot rang out in the empty range, and to her amazement, she saw that she had hit the target near the center. Panic immediately set in as Maria realized what she had done. She quickly put the rifle back exactly where she found it and continued with her cleaning. Her hands shaking as she wiped down the tables, she tried to convince herself it was just beginner's luck, but deep down, something had awakened in her that morning. For the first time in years, she felt a connection to something beyond her daily routine of cleaning and surviving. That evening, Maria went home to her small apartment where she lived alone. Her children had grown up and moved away, and her husband had left years ago when the financial pressure became too much. As she prepared her simple dinner, she couldn't stop thinking about that moment in the shooting range. The feeling of the rifle in her hands, the satisfaction of hitting the target, and the brief escape from her ordinary life played over and over in her mind. She began to research shooting sports online using the old computer at the local library. Maria learned about different types of competitions, the equipment required, and the training involved. She discovered that there were shooting events for people of all ages and backgrounds, not just elite athletes. The more she read, the more a crazy idea began to form in her mind. What if she could learn to shoot properly? What if this wasn't just a one-time moment of luck? Maria had spent her entire adult life cleaning up after other people's dreams, watching from the sidelines as athletes pursued their passions. Maybe it was time to pursue something of her own. No matter how impossible it seemed for a middle-aged cleaning lady with no money and no connections. The next morning, Maria returned to work with a new sense of purpose. As she cleaned the shooting range, she paid even closer attention to the athletes' techniques. She began to understand the subtle differences in their stances, the way they controlled their breathing during long-range shots, and how they maintained their focus under pressure. She started taking mental notes, building a library of knowledge that she hoped to use someday. During her lunch breaks, Maria began approaching some of the friendlier athletes and coaches, asking innocent questions about shooting techniques while pretending to be curious about their sport. Most were happy to share basic information with the kind cleaning lady, who always kept their facilities spotless. They had no idea that their casual explanations were being absorbed by someone who was secretly dreaming of becoming a competitor herself. As weeks passed, Maria's secret desire grew stronger. She knew that pursuing this dream would require sacrifices she wasn't sure she could make. Training would cost money she didn't have, and she would need equipment that was far beyond her budget. But for the first time in years, she had something to hope for beyond just getting through each day. The question was whether she would have the courage to take the first real step toward turning her impossible dream into reality. 3 months had passed since Maria's secret moment with the rifle, and her desire to learn proper shooting had only grown stronger. She had saved every penny she could from her modest salary, cutting back on groceries and walking to work instead of taking the bus. The small jar hidden under her bed now contained $200, not nearly enough for proper equipment, but it was a start. One morning while cleaning the coach's office, Maria overheard a conversation that made her heart race. Coach Peterson, the head shooting instructor, was complaining to his assistant about the lack of interest from local community members. "The Olympic Committee wants us to reach out to regular people, not just elite athletes," he said with frustration. "They want community programs, but how are we supposed to find ordinary folks who are interested in shooting sports?" Maria's hands trembled as she dusted the shelves nearby. This was the opportunity she had been hoping for, but actually speaking up felt impossible. She was just a cleaner. Who was she to think she could participate in an Olympic sport? Her inner voice reminded her of all the times she had been told to know her place, to be grateful for what she had, and not to reach beyond her station in life. For the rest of that day, Maria couldn't concentrate on her work. She kept replaying the conversation in her mind, and by the time her shift ended, she had made a decision that terrified and excited her in equal measure. The next morning, she would ask Coach Peterson about the community program. The worst thing that could happen was that he would say no, and she would be exactly where she was now. When Maria arrived at work the following day, her stomach was tied in knots. She went through her usual routine, but every time she saw Coach Peterson, she lost her nerve. Finally, during her lunch break, she found him alone in the equipment room, organizing rifles for the afternoon training session. Taking a deep breath, she knocked gently on the open door. "Excuse me, Coach Peterson," she said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. "I heard you talking yesterday about wanting to reach out to the community. I was wondering if someone like me could learn to shoot." Coach Peterson looked up, surprised to see the cleaning lady who had always been polite, but had never initiated a conversation before. "Someone like you?" he asked, not unkindly, but with genuine curiosity. Maria felt her cheeks burn with embarrassment. "I mean someone who isn't young or athletic or educated, someone who has never done any sports before. I know it probably sounds crazy, but I've always been interested in shooting. I watch the athletes train every day, and I've been reading about it in my spare time." The coach studied her face for a moment, seeing something in her eyes that reminded him of his most dedicated athletes. "Have you ever held a rifle before, Maria?" he asked. "Only once," she admitted, then immediately worried that she had confessed to something she shouldn't have done. "I'm sorry, I know I shouldn't have touched the equipment that day. I was just so curious and no one was around and I couldn't help myself." To her surprise, Coach Peterson smiled. "Did you hit the target?" "Yes, sir. Near the center. But I'm sure it was just luck." The coach was quiet for a long moment, then made a decision that would change both of their lives. "The Olympic Committee has been pressuring us to start a community outreach program. We're supposed to identify people with natural talent who might not have had traditional opportunities. Would you be interested in being our first participant?" Maria felt like the world had stopped spinning. "You mean you would teach me, really?" "I mean I would give you a chance to show what you can do. No promises beyond that. Training would be early mornings before your regular work shift, and you would need to provide your own equipment eventually. It won't be easy, and most people your age don't have the physical conditioning for competitive shooting." "I'll do whatever it takes," Maria said immediately. "I've been getting up at 4 a.m. for 8 years anyway. I'm stronger than I look and I learn fast. Please, just give me a chance." Coach Peterson was moved by her desperation and determination. In 20 years of coaching, he had seen countless talented athletes come and go, but he had never seen someone want something as badly as this middle-aged cleaning lady wanted to learn to shoot. "All right, Maria, we'll start tomorrow morning at 6 a.m. before the regular athletes arrive. Bring workout clothes and be prepared to work harder than you've ever worked in your life." That evening, Maria called her daughter Carmen for the first time in months. They had grown apart over the years, with Carmen embarrassed by her mother's job and Maria too proud to admit how lonely and unfulfilled she felt. "Mija," she said when Carmen answered the phone, "I have something to tell you. I'm going to learn to shoot competitively." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. "Mom, are you feeling okay? You're 42 years old and you clean toilets for a living. What are you talking about shooting competitively?" "I know it sounds impossible," Maria said, "but I got accepted into a training program at the Olympic Center. A real coach is going to teach me. I might actually be good at this, Carmen." "Mom, please don't set yourself up for disappointment. These people are just being nice to you because you work there. This isn't realistic for someone in your position." After hanging up the phone, Maria sat in her small kitchen feeling deflated. Maybe Carmen was right. Maybe she was being foolish to think she could compete with real athletes. But then she remembered the feeling of hitting that target, the sense of purpose she had felt for the first time in years, and the respect she had seen in Coach Peterson's eyes when she told him about her interest. She went to bed early that night, setting her alarm for 5 a.m. Tomorrow would be the first day of the hardest thing she had ever attempted, and she was going to give it everything she had. Whether she succeeded or failed, at least she would know she had tried to reach for something beyond her ordinary life. As she drifted off to sleep, Maria imagined herself in competition, wearing the uniform of her country, representing not just herself, but all the overlooked people who had been told their dreams were too big for their circumstances. It was a fantasy that seemed impossible. But for the first time in decades, she was going to chase something that belonged entirely to her. At exactly 5:45 a.m., Maria stood outside the shooting range in borrowed workout clothes that didn't quite fit her properly. Her hands were shaking, not from the cold morning air, but from pure nervousness. She had barely slept, spending most of the night wondering if she was making a huge mistake. When Coach Peterson arrived and unlocked the door, she noticed his surprised expression. He probably hadn't expected her to actually show up. "Good morning, Maria," he said with a slight smile. "Ready to see what you're made of?" The first hour was brutal. Coach Peterson started with basic physical conditioning that Maria had never experienced in her life. Push-ups, planks, breathing exercises, and stability drills that made her muscles burn in ways she didn't know were possible. Her body, accustomed to the repetitive motions of cleaning, struggled with these new demands. Sweat poured down her face as she tried to keep up with the coach's instructions. "Shooting isn't just about pulling a trigger," Coach Peterson explained as Maria gasped for breath during a brief rest. "Elite shooters need core strength, steady, hands-controlled breathing, and mental focus that can last for hours. Your body is your foundation, and right now, that foundation needs work." Despite the physical challenges, Maria felt more alive than she had in years. When they finally moved to actual shooting instruction, she discovered that her natural instincts were even better than Coach Peterson had hoped. Her hand-eye coordination was excellent, and more importantly, she had an unusual ability to remain calm under pressure, a skill developed from years of dealing with difficult situations while maintaining her composure. Most new shooters struggle with breathing control, the coach observed as Maria lined up her shot. "But you're naturally finding the right rhythm. Where did you learn to stay so calm?" Maria lowered the rifle and thought about his question. "I guess when you spend years cleaning up other people's messes and dealing with people who don't always treat you with respect, you learn to stay steady on the inside no matter what's happening around you." Over the following weeks, their morning training sessions became the highlight of Maria's day. She arrived early and stayed late, absorbing every piece of instruction like a sponge. Coach Peterson had initially planned to give her basic lessons and see if she lost interest, but her dedication and rapid improvement surprised him. She was asking sophisticated questions about wind conditions, ammunition types, and competition rules that showed she was serious about learning everything she could. The other athletes began to notice the middle-aged cleaning lady who was now training with real equipment during the early morning hours. Some were curious and supportive, asking her about her background and encouraging her progress. Others were less welcoming, making comments about playing dress-up and questioning whether someone her age should be taking up training time and resources that could go to younger athletes with more potential. Maria overheard these comments but tried not to let them affect her focus. She had dealt with people looking down on her for most of her adult life, and she wasn't going to let their opinions stop her now. What hurt more was the continued skepticism from her own family. When she called her son Roberto to tell him about her training, his response was even more discouraging than his sister's had been. "Mom, this is embarrassing," he said bluntly. "My friends are asking me why my mother thinks she's going to become some kind of Olympic athlete. You're making us look foolish. Why can't you just be happy with your job and stop trying to be something you're not?" After 3 months of training, Coach Peterson approached Maria with news that both excited and terrified her. "There's a regional competition next month for amateur shooters. Nothing fancy, but it would give you a chance to see how you perform under real competition conditions. The entry fee is $50, and you would need your own equipment." Maria's heart sank. $50 might not seem like much to others, but it represented a significant portion of her monthly budget, and the equipment costs were far beyond what she had saved. A decent rifle would cost at least $800, plus accessories, ammunition, and travel expenses to the competition site. That evening, Maria sat at her kitchen table with a calculator and her bank statements, trying to figure out how she could possibly afford to compete. She could sell some of her few possessions, maybe pick up extra cleaning work on weekends or ask for advance payment from her employer. Each option meant more sacrifice from a life that already had very little margin for error. As she was calculating possibilities, her phone rang. It was Coach Peterson. "Maria, I've been thinking about the competition. I know the financial barriers are significant for you. I'd like to propose something. The training center has some older equipment that we're planning to replace. If you're willing to sign a commitment to represent our community program and compete in at least 3 amateur competitions this year, I can arrange for you to use our backup rifle and cover your entry fees." Maria couldn't speak for a moment. "Coach, I don't know what to say. Why would you do this for me?" "Because in 20 years of coaching, I've rarely seen someone with your combination of natural ability and determination. And because I believe the sport needs people like you, people who prove that talent can come from anywhere. But Maria, this means you'll be representing not just yourself but our entire program. Are you ready for that kind of pressure?" Without hesitation, Maria answered, "Yes, sir. I won't let you down." As she hung up the phone, Maria realized that her impossible dream was starting to become a real possibility. She was going to compete in her first shooting competition in just 4 weeks. The scared part of her wanted to run away from the challenge, but the stronger part of her, the part that had been awakened 3 months ago when she first held a rifle, was ready to show the world what a cleaning lady could accomplish when given a real chance. She called her daughter Carmen with the news, hoping for some support and encouragement. But Carmen's response reminded Maria that her biggest challenges might not come from the competition itself, but from convincing others that she deserved to be there in the first place. The morning of Maria's first competition arrived with gray skies and a cold wind that made her hands shake as she loaded Coach Peterson's equipment into his truck. She had barely eaten breakfast, her stomach twisted with nerves that felt different from anything she had experienced during training. This was real now. She would be competing against people who had been shooting for years, people who belonged in this world in ways that she still wasn't sure she did. During the 2-hour drive to the regional shooting complex, Coach Peterson tried to keep her relaxed by talking about technique and strategy, but Maria could barely focus on his words. She kept thinking about all the ways she might embarrass herself, all the competitors who would wonder what a middle-aged cleaning lady was doing at their competition, and all the people back home who were probably hoping she would fail so they could say they had been right about her. When they arrived at the shooting facility, Maria was overwhelmed by the professional atmosphere. Competitors were unloading expensive equipment from custom cases, wearing specialized shooting jackets and gear that cost more than she made in several months. She felt completely out of place in her borrowed jacket and old athletic shoes, carrying the training center's backup rifle in a worn case. "Remember, Maria," Coach Peterson said as they walked toward the registration table, "you've been hitting consistent scores in training that would place you in the top half of this field. These people aren't better than you. They just have more experience with competition nerves. Trust your training and shoot like you do every morning." The registration process was intimidating. Other competitors looked at her with curiosity, and sometimes barely concealed skepticism when she gave her occupation as custodial services on the entry form. A few made polite conversation, but she could sense their surprise that someone like her was entering a serious competition. One older man asked directly, "Is this your first time shooting, dear? This isn't really a beginner's competition." "I've been training for 4 months," Maria replied quietly, trying to keep the defensive edge out of her voice. 4 months? The man laughed, not unkindly but clearly amused. "Most of us have been shooting for decades. Well, good for you for trying something new. Don't feel bad if you don't finish very well today." As Maria walked away from that conversation, she felt her confidence crumbling. Maybe everyone was right. Maybe 4 months of training wasn't enough to compete with people who had been perfecting their skills for years. Maybe she was just setting herself up for public humiliation. The competition format was more complex than anything she had experienced in training. Instead of just shooting at stationary targets, competitors had to complete multiple stages with different distances, time limits, and shooting positions. The 4,000-meter event that Maria had entered was particularly challenging, requiring sustained accuracy over an extremely long distance that tested both technical skill and mental endurance. When her name was called for the first stage, Maria felt like she might be sick. Her hands were trembling as she set up her equipment, and she could feel other competitors watching her with mixtures of curiosity and doubt. As she took her position and raised the rifle, all the confidence she had built up during months of training seemed to evaporate. Her first shot was well off center. Not terrible, but nowhere near the precision she had been achieving in practice. She could hear whispers behind her, and she was certain people were confirming their expectations that she didn't belong there. The second shot was better, but still not up to her usual standard. Maria realized that she was trying so hard to prove herself that she was forgetting everything Coach Peterson had taught her about breathing and mental focus. During a brief break between stages, Coach Peterson pulled her aside. "What's happening out there? You're shooting like someone who's never held a rifle before." "I can't stop thinking about what everyone is thinking about me," Maria admitted. "I feel like I'm representing every cleaning lady, every middle-aged woman, every person who's been told they don't belong somewhere. The pressure is crushing me." "Maria, look at me," the coach said firmly. "Do you remember why you started doing this? It wasn't to prove anything to these people. It was because you discovered something inside yourself that you had never had a chance to explore. Stop shooting for their approval and start shooting for yourself. Show them who you really are, not who they expect you to be." His words hit her like a revelation. She had been so focused on fitting in and proving she deserved to be there that she had forgotten the pure joy and focus she felt during her morning training sessions. This wasn't about gaining acceptance from people who had already decided she didn't belong. This was about honoring the part of herself that had been awakened when she first picked up a rifle. When Maria returned for the final stage, the challenging 4,000-meter event, something had changed in her demeanor. She set up her equipment with the same careful precision she used every morning at the training center. She blocked out the whispers and the stares, focusing instead on the familiar routine of breath control and sight alignment that had become second nature to her. As she took aim at the distant target, Maria felt the same calm certainty that had carried her through years of facing daily challenges and setbacks. This shot wasn't about proving anything to anyone else. It was about proving to herself that her dreams were valid, that her hard work had meaning, and that talent and determination could come from the most unexpected places. The rifle felt steady in her hands as she found her breathing rhythm. The world around her seemed to fade away until there was nothing but the target, the crosshairs, and the quiet confidence that she knew exactly what she was doing. When she squeezed the trigger, she knew even before seeing the result that something special had just happened. The spotter's call rang out across the range. "X-ring, perfect center." For a moment, there was stunned silence from the other competitors and spectators. Then Coach Peterson's voice broke through the quiet. "That's my shooter." Maria lowered the rifle with a smile spreading across her face. She had just hit a perfect shot at 4,000 meters in her first competition. But more importantly, she had rediscovered the feeling that had started this whole journey. The knowledge that she was capable of far more than anyone, including herself, had ever imagined. The aftermath of Maria's perfect 4,000-meter shot transformed the entire atmosphere at the competition. Competitors who had been dismissive or skeptical now approached her with genuine respect and curiosity. The older man who had questioned her experience earlier came over to congratulate her, admitting that he had never seen someone hit such a precise shot under pressure in their first competition. "That was extraordinary," he said, shaking her hand firmly. "I've been shooting for 30 years and I've never hit a perfect center at that distance in competition." "Where did you learn to shoot like that?" Maria found herself surrounded by athletes and coaches asking about her training background, her equipment preferences, and her future competition plans. For someone who had spent years being invisible while cleaning around these same types of people, the sudden attention was overwhelming, but deeply gratifying. She answered their questions honestly, explaining her unconventional path to the sport and her intensive training with Coach Peterson. When the final scores were announced, Maria had placed third overall in her division, an unprecedented achievement for someone competing for the first time. As she stood on the medal platform, holding her bronze medal and looking out at an audience that included competitors who had initially doubted her presence there, she felt a sense of vindication that went far beyond personal satisfaction. The drive home was filled with excited discussion about future competitions and training adjustments. Coach Peterson was already making plans for Maria to compete in larger regional events, and he mentioned the possibility of pursuing national-level competitions if she continued to improve at her current rate. "Maria, I need you to understand something," he said seriously. "What you did today isn't just unusual, it's exceptional. You have natural abilities that many people train their entire lives to develop." When Maria returned to work the next Monday, word of her competition success had somehow spread throughout the Olympic Training Center. Athletes who had never spoken to her before stopped to congratulate her, and several coaches asked if she would be interested in discussing her training methods with some of their struggling athletes. The same facilities she had been cleaning for 8 years now felt different. She was no longer just the invisible cleaning lady, but a recognized athlete in her own right. The local newspaper picked up the story, running a feature article titled, "From Janitor to Champion, Local Woman's Remarkable Shooting Success." The article included a photo of Maria holding her medal, standing next to Coach Peterson at the training center. When the paper came out, Maria bought 5 copies, 1 to keep, and 4 to mail to her children and her elderly mother who lived in Mexico. Her daughter Carmen called that evening, and for the first time in months her voice held pride instead of embarrassment. "Mom, I saw the newspaper article online. I had no idea you were taking this so seriously. I'm sorry I wasn't more supportive before. This is actually really impressive." "Thank you, Mia," Maria replied. "I know it seemed crazy at first. It seemed crazy to me too. But sometimes you have to trust that feeling inside you that says you're capable of more than your circumstances suggest." The success brought new challenges along with the recognition. Other competitors and shooting enthusiasts began contacting Maria for advice and interviews. A local sports equipment company offered to sponsor her with discounted gear in exchange for representing their brand at competitions. The attention was flattering, but it also created pressure to maintain her performance level and justify the faith that people were placing in her abilities. More importantly, Maria realized that her success was inspiring other people who felt trapped in their circumstances. She received letters from middle-aged women who had given up on their dreams, from working-class people who felt excluded from elite sports, and from immigrants who saw her story as proof that hard work and determination could overcome social barriers. The responsibility of being a role model was something she had never expected, but she embraced it with the same determination she brought to her shooting. 6 months after her first competition, Maria had won medals in 4 regional events and was being invited to try out for the national team. The same woman who used to eat lunch alone on a bench outside the shooting range was now training, alongside Olympic hopefuls and receiving coaching from some of the country's most respected instructors. The transformation wasn't just in her shooting abilities or her public recognition, it was in how she saw herself and how others saw her. She still worked her cleaning job, partly out of financial necessity, but also because she enjoyed the stability and the relationships she had built with the athletes and staff. However, she now worked with the confidence of someone who knew she belonged in this environment, not just as support staff, but as a fellow athlete pursuing excellence. During a particularly intense training session, one of the younger Olympic prospects asked Maria about her mental preparation techniques. "How do you stay so calm under pressure?" Even when you were new to competition, you never seemed nervous like the rest of us. Maria thought about the question while adjusting her equipment. I think when you've spent years being told you don't matter, when you've been invisible to most people around you, there's a kind of freedom in that. I'm not afraid of failing because I've already survived being dismissed and overlooked. The worst thing that can happen to me in competition is that I'll go back to being underestimated, and I've been living with that my whole life. Her response made the younger athlete think about his own relationship with pressure and expectations. Maria realized that her unconventional background wasn't just a hurdle she had overcome, it was actually a source of strength that gave her advantages over competitors who had never faced real adversity outside of sports. As she prepared for her first national-level competition, Maria reflected on how dramatically her life had changed in less than a year. She was no longer just dreaming about being someone different. She had become someone different while still honoring who she had always been. The cleaning lady and the champion shooter weren't separate identities. They were both parts of the same person who had finally found a way to express her full potential. 2 years after Maria first picked up a rifle in secret, she stood at the starting line of the National Shooting Championships, wearing the official team jacket of her country's development squad. The journey from that terrifying first competition to this moment had been filled with victories, setbacks, intense training, and personal growth that she could never have imagined when she was just a cleaning lady, watching athletes through glass doors. The national championships represented the highest level of domestic competition, with winners earning spots on international teams and opportunities to compete in world-class events. Maria had qualified for the championships by winning 3 consecutive regional competitions and setting new amateur records in her distance categories. She was no longer the curiosity story about the middle-aged cleaner who could shoot. She was now recognized as one of the most promising distance shooters in the country. Her preparation for nationals had been more intensive than anything she had experienced before. Coach Peterson had connected her with specialized trainers who helped her refine her technique, sports psychologists who worked on her mental game, and nutritionists who optimized her physical conditioning. The support team that surrounded her now was a far cry from those early morning training sessions when it was just her, the coach, and borrowed equipment. Despite all the professional support and recognition, Maria never forgot where she came from. She still worked part-time at the Olympic Training Center, though now her schedule was arranged around her competition training. The athletes and coaches, who had once seen her only as part of the cleaning staff, now sought her advice on handling pressure and maintaining focus during long competitions. The morning of the final event, the 4,000-meter precision shooting that had been her breakthrough event 2 years earlier, Maria felt a familiar calm settle over her. This wasn't the terrified nervousness of her first competition, but the focused anticipation of an athlete who knew exactly what she was capable of achieving. As she set up her equipment for the final round, Maria noticed her family in the spectator stands. Carmen had flown in from another state to watch her compete, and her son Roberto had brought his own children to see their grandmother compete at the national level. Her elderly mother had even made the trip from Mexico, wearing a handmade shirt with Maria's name and number embroidered on the front. The sight of her family's support brought tears to Maria's eyes, but they were tears of gratitude rather than sadness. 2 years ago, her children had been embarrassed by her pursuing what they saw as an impossible dream. Now they were proudly watching her compete at the highest level of her sport, understanding finally that her determination hadn't been foolishness but vision. The competition was intense, with Maria facing shooters who had been competing internationally for decades. The 4,000-meter event required sustained precision over multiple rounds, testing not just technical skill but mental endurance and the ability to maintain peak performance under increasing pressure as the competition progressed. Through the first 3 rounds, Maria maintained her position among the top competitors, but she wasn't leading. The shooter in first place was a former Olympic medalist who had returned to competition after a brief retirement. In second place was a young prodigy who had been shooting since childhood and was expected to dominate the sport for the next decade. Going into the final round, Maria was in third place, just 2 points behind the leader. She had never been this close to winning a national championship, and the pressure was unlike anything she had experienced before. This wasn't just about personal achievement anymore. It was about proving that unconventional paths to excellence were valid. That age and background didn't have to limit potential, and that dreams deferred weren't necessarily dreams denied. As she prepared for her final shots, Maria blocked out the crowd noise and the knowledge of what was at stake. She returned to the fundamentals that Coach Peterson had taught her 2 years earlier: breath control, sight alignment, and the quiet confidence that came from knowing she had prepared as thoroughly as possible for this moment. Her first shot of the final round hit the X-ring, perfect center. The crowd's reaction was audible even through her ear protection. Her second shot was equally precise, and suddenly she was tied for the lead with only 3 shots remaining for each competitor. The young prodigy shot next and scored well, but not perfectly. The former Olympic medalist followed with a shot that moved him back into the lead by a single point. When Maria stepped up for her final shot, she needed a perfect score to win her first national championship. Standing at the firing line, Maria felt the weight of everyone's expectations and her own dreams resting on this single shot. She thought about the morning 2 years ago when she had secretly picked up a rifle for the first time, driven by nothing more than curiosity and a desperate desire for something meaningful in her life. She thought about all the people who had told her to be realistic, to accept her limitations, to be grateful for what she had instead of reaching for what seemed impossible. But mostly, she thought about the lesson she had learned during her first competition, that she shot best when she was shooting for herself, not for anyone else's approval or expectations. This shot wasn't about proving anything to the doubters or living up to anyone else's dreams for her. It was about honoring the courage she had found within herself to pursue excellence regardless of what others thought was possible for a woman like her. Maria raised her rifle with the same steady precision she had developed during hundreds of early morning training sessions. Her breathing settled into the familiar rhythm that had become as natural as walking. The distant target came into sharp focus through her sight, and everything else in the world faded away except for this moment of perfect concentration. When she squeezed the trigger, Maria knew immediately that the shot was true. The spotter's call confirmed what she already felt in her heart. X-ring, dead center. Perfect score. The crowd erupted in cheers as the final scores were calculated and announced. Maria Santos, the 44-year-old former cleaning lady, had won the national championship in 4,000-meter precision shooting, setting a new national record in the process. As she was presented with the gold medal and the championship trophy, Maria looked up at her family in the stands and saw tears of pride streaming down their faces. In her victory speech, Maria spoke not just about her own journey, but about the importance of never giving up on dreams, no matter how late in life they might appear. 2 years ago, I was invisible to most people, she said to the audience. I cleaned the facilities where champions trained, but I never thought I could be one of them. This medal doesn't just belong to me. It belongs to everyone who has been told their dreams are too big, their circumstances too limiting, or their timing too late. The media attention following her championship victory was overwhelming but purposeful. Maria used every interview and appearance to encourage others who felt trapped by their circumstances to pursue their own versions of excellence. She established a scholarship fund to help working-class adults access sports training and competition opportunities that would otherwise be financially impossible. A year later, Maria represented her country at the World Championships, finishing in the top 10 among the world's best shooters. She continued working part-time at the Olympic Training Center, but now she also served as a mentor and coach for the community outreach program that had given her own dreams their first real chance. Her story became a symbol of possibility for people everywhere who had been overlooked or underestimated. Maria Santos had proven that talent and determination could emerge from the most unexpected places. That age was not a barrier to achieving excellence, and that the dreams we discover later in life can be just as powerful and valid as those we pursue in our youth. Most importantly, she had shown that being just a cleaner was never a limitation. It was simply one part of a life that contained unlimited potential for growth, achievement, and the kind of success that comes from finally allowing yourself to become who you were always meant to be. Maria had not just won championships, she had won the right to define herself on her own terms, and to prove that extraordinary accomplishments could come from the most ordinary beginnings.